coordinate that at all.
Yeah.
Cheers, man.
We're back.
We're
Louder
back.
than the fridge. I guess we can call this season 2.
Season 2. But the problem is we also took a 3-month break before our last episode.
Yeah.
Season 3? Season 2 was really short. Disney got their hands on it. It got canned, and now we're with fucking...
Exactly. Blame Fox News. I don't know. But yeah, we're going to try to do these more consistently. We also said that last time.
Very much so. And do not hold us to that, because we'll probably break that promise immediately.
Yeah, but we're going to try. So, yeah, I just looked on our files. The last episode we did was 2021, so it's been a while.
Over 2 years ago? Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm. What's changed? Holy shit, so much has changed.
A lot. So, yeah, for those that don't know, Taylor and I play in a band, and our band has started playing shows. We're in the process of recording a new album.
For those of you who don't know, I think this is the longest we've gone into an episode without mentioning Veritones.
That's true. Probably. But yeah, we're here. We're back. What are we talking about today, Taylor?
Well, that's all we're saying about our band? That's how we're summarizing post-COVID Veritones? We're in a band?
We're doing shows. We're recording an album.
We just recorded an album. We have a full 4K live show that we just recorded at a mansion out in Toronto. By the way, that's the intro to the episode and the outro, so go check it out on YouTube. Veritones Live at Baba House.
Yeah.
Shameless plug.
That's why you're the media guy. All right, so what are we talking about today?
Well, we figured with us attempting a comeback, we should look at how other people attempted comebacks.
Yeah, that's it. So thought up of the idea of let's look at some comeback albums throughout music history. I mean, mostly rock and roll, because that's kind of what we focus on. But
I don't know about you, but immediately when I started looking at comeback albums, there was like a wide variety of what that means.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an interesting topic, because I was thinking about that too, of like what is a comeback album, and there's a couple different ways I think that something can be considered a comeback album, right? Like, you know, a big part of it is if, you know, a band has like a lineup change for whatever reason, be
Us.
it, you know, like death or just creative differences or whatever, and then they're putting out a new album with a new iteration. So that's kind of a comeback of them saying like, okay, we're still here. Another one I thought of is, you know, there's bands that have a lot of commercial success with an album, and then they'll kind of put out a few, not really get that same level of commercial success, and then come back with an album that just kind of flies right to the top.
Us.
Yeah.
That's what's gonna happen.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I just thought of this while we were talking about, like, you know, someone dies, someone gets replaced. If I die and you guys don't use that to sell albums or something, I'm gonna be really pissed.
Upset,
Like, if you don't monetize my death, that's a wasted opportunity.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that's kind of how, you know, we all feel about it, is, you know, our singer died doing this album.
You have until June. That's when I turn 28, and it's all
that's
over.
true. Then it, you know,
then it doesn't matter.
No more marketing. It's a fucking old boomer dies on drums.
Look at this fucking guy. He's dead. Who cares?
Yeah. Yeah, and the last type of comeback really I could think of is a reunion, which is kind of an interesting thing because, you know, all reunions are kind of a comeback, but not all comebacks are reunions. So
yeah. And also, I would say the least successful overall, typically a reunion.
yeah, generally, there's kind of, it becomes very hard to recapture the original magic when you're doing that. A lot of them kind of come off as like nostalgia plays.
Yeah, and I mean, look at how many bands fall into the curse of releasing albums after the greatest hits era, right? Like, there are very few bands who have managed to pull that off.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that kind of covers what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking comeback albums. Anything that you thought of otherwise, or
that's pretty much it. I have some intricacies within those categories of, you know, it's not always so black and white, and sometimes, you know, the comeback is just public opinion of like, oh, this guy fell off. Maybe they're even still putting out good stuff, but not as many people are liking it or even listening to it. And there's I don't know if you want to jump into this right away, but
yeah, sure. Do you have one you have in mind right away?
Yeah, I mean, one that kind of falls into a couple categories of not just like falling out of relevancy, but adjusting with the times is Johnny Cash.
Okay.
This is, I think, a big one.
Yeah.
All thanks to Mr. Rick Rubin.
Yeah.
Who, so many, actually, when I was looking up at like comeback albums, that kind of stuff, a lot of them were Rick Rubin. You got like Red Hot Chili Peppers, you got Johnny Cash. I forget what other ones I saw there. Maybe it was who was the one that you were showing me the other day that Elton John plays on?
Oh, Alice in Chains.
Was he part of that?
I don't think so. I'm not.
Never mind then.
He might have.
But I saw a couple. It's like this dude loves to just take people who are out of relevancy and just like pop them right back in.
Yeah, and he was responsible for a lot of like he takes artists and kind of adds his own production style, and it tends to elevate their stuff. Like immediately when I hear Rick Rubin, I always think of Slayer. Funny enough,
Slayer.
Yeah. So he's Rick Rubin came up as kind of this hip hop guy, and then he produced Slayer's Rain and Blood, and he was really the first producer that had worked with Slayer to be like, oh, this super aggressive metal band should be right in your face when you're hearing it, not 10 feet away, right here. So, he did that, and he had an interesting way of, taking his musical experience and just applying it to other bands in a way that really shaped a lot of popular music.
And he did it with like a wide variety of artists.
Yeah.
Like Johnny Cash is not Red Hot Chili Peppers, and he worked with Nirvana too, didn't he?
I don't.
Maybe Foo Fighters then?
Might have worked with Foo Fighters. Not sure on that. I don't know.
As you can tell, the podcast has not changed with my lack of available information.
Yeah, there is a big caveat of like, we're gonna say musical facts. Some of them are probably right.
What, you don't come here for just the facts?
No, we're not gonna let the truth get in the way of a good story, right?
Yeah, but like, look at Johnny Cash, who obviously the 50s, 60s were his heyday.
Yeah.
Comes the 70s, 80s, 90s. 70s held some prominence, but like by the time the early 90s hit, who listened to Johnny Cash anymore?
That
Rick Rubin gets a hold of him, and he does American Recordings, a series of 5 albums, which is his obviously most popular one, and has Hurt, Personal Jesus, a bunch of covers on there, which if you go to Spotify, Hurt's his number one played song on there. Like, you listen to his voice, he sounds old, obviously, but is kind of using that to his advantage. He's using that to portray emotion and show the frailty in his voice. Yeah,
well, what I think is so cool about that is they really, he did a great job of capturing Johnny Cash where he was in life. Hurt is widely considered one of the best cover songs of all time, and it's kind of in the context of, this man at the end of his life kind of reflecting back and seeing all the people he's lost, all the people he's hurt, and how he's internalizing that and stuff is really cool. And I think it's a pretty bold move to really paint this picture of this artist. It would have been really easy to be like, Johnny Cash, throwback to the golden days.
Yeah.
Folsom Prison 2.
Bring him back.
Yeah. But that's not what he sought to do. So
no, and just thinking about it now, Hurt might be a prime example of one of the best cover songs of all time.
Yeah.
He's making it his own. It's transformative. It is taking a song. Who would have ever thought before this that Johnny Cash would be covering 9 Inch Nails? Yeah, nobody. Who would think of that?
Yeah.
And Johnny Cash comes in, and it's the song he's most well known for now. Well, maybe not most well known for, but it's his highest on Spotify. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's up there, and there's not really that many artists that would have a song they recorded 50 years into their career that really rivals in popularity what they did, 10, 20 years into it,
and still holds cultural relevancy.
Yeah, and is regarded with such respect in terms of its artistic value, right?
And we know as a band how hard it is. We always want to do cover songs, and it's okay, we're trying to make it our own, and kind of trying to do a small version of that where we're taking a song, transforming it into our style. That's not an easy thing to do.
It's very difficult, and it takes practice. And to just, have a couple examples where it was done so masterfully is really cool to see.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, Johnny Cash's, artist voice was a lot more set in stone, and, other than, like, our always changing lineup of delinquents.
Yeah, us screwing around. But yeah, no, it's a, cool thing for Johnny Cash to have such, like, well-loved albums right at the end of his career, because I think it really cements his legacy. Because as we were looking up, doing some preliminary research for this episode, I'm sure you looked up too, like, best comeback albums, worst comeback albums, and he had a couple that, like, were on both. There's some artists throughout this process that, like, they had multiple comebacks. Some more successful than others.
Definitely.
And if I remember correctly, I think he had one kind of like early to mid 90s that didn't go so hot.
Johnny Cash?
Yeah.
Ooh, I don't even remember that one.
Don't remember the album name or something, so probably was on the worst comebacks list.
Yeah.
But it's good that he was able to, finish strong with the Rick Rubin albums and really kind of, cement his legacy.
And like, thank God, like, you look at some of the artists who, as of late, haven't been doing well, and like 10 years ago, it's like, not to say that we devalue an artist's death if they're releasing shit music, but if they put out, like, and we'll talk about later, a literal death album, and it's amazing, that death is going to have a lot more long-standing importance.
Yeah, it changes the perception for sure.
Like, if Johnny Cash is hurt, is what I think of with Johnny Cash dying, right? Like, that's where my mind goes, and that holds a weird place with people, like,
oh, for sure. And it's just like such a powerful, message, image that he got to put out, which, again, very few artists have that privilege to really, like, okay, I know I'm dying, or like, I know I'm kind of, this is where it's going, I'm gonna control the narrative. Rather, like, for most people, you croak and then people remember what they remember, right? So.
Yeah. Okay. I think I need to get this out of the way now.
Yeah.
Because I've mentioned it a few times already. Yeah. And just let me go. Bowie.
Yeah. Okay. I'll let you run.
Bowie is really tied in with Johnny Cash in my mind, because he also had a voice that changed over time, and up until 2003 was legit releasing an album every year or two.
Yeah.
Like, from 1967 up to 2003 with Reality. Yeah. Just every couple of years, here's Bowie.
Yeah, here's a new album. Had a couple, like, full reinventions in there too.
Oh yeah, you have the Thin White Duke, you have Ziggy Stardust, you have all these, like, characters, and his style changed and all that. One thing that he struggled with changing was his actual voice deteriorating, just like Johnny Cash, right? Johnny Cash, you listen to, especially American Recordings 5. Yeah. He can't hit the notes he used to, and Johnny Cash, I'm not going to say he has a huge range on his voice, but you hear in those lower notes are kind of breaking up and stuff. Bowie had that issue as well. And there was 10 years between Reality and The Next Day. Yeah. The Next Day, he started the 2 Chainz, two albums, his 2 last albums, where he just didn't let people know it was coming. Yeah. Just kind of kept it under lock and key, released it, and we saw the start of this 2-album chain, which was starting to reflect on his life. Yeah. And he used the fact that his voice was deteriorating to his advantage. Yeah. Same thing Johnny Cash did, where he was, using those breaks in his voice to portray emotion, which is a really good way of aging, because we've both seen bands play that try and do shit like they used to. Yeah, and it sounds awful.
Yeah, you're fighting biology at that point, and it's kind of a shame. Like, obviously, with big bands that have hits and people love those songs, they want to hear them, but it can be kind of a shame for the singer to just, especially bands we like, where they hit their popularity kind of 70s and 80s kind of thing. By now they're like 70 and 80.
Yeah, shit. So. I saw Steve Miller Band in 2012 playing with Tower of Power and Journey. And these guys did not adjust anything.
Yeah.
And they were in the 60s, right? Like, they were prominent in the 60s. They must have been, what? That make them like 80 something?
Yeah, probably somewhere around there.
And they were trying to do shit like they used to. And he sounded awful.
Yeah.
And he was trying to run around. He's just this old dude out of breath, like not hitting any notes, forgetting lyrics. And like, Steve Miller Band's a huge fucking band.
Oh, yeah.
And like, if you're at that age, like when I saw Dennis DeYoung, he was just like at his keyboard.
Yeah.
He's like, he literally said, I'm too old to run around.
Yeah.
I'm going to let my son do it. Like, and his son was up there giving energy, and Dennis DeYoung's at the keyboards, like playing and singing and stuff. But like, yeah, I went off on a tangent here, but I just, I want to end the Bowie thing in artists who use. Johnny Cash used Hurt as a reflection on his life, and David Bowie very much did that as well. Obviously, in Black Star, his album he released when he died, but in The Next Day, he starts going back to the styles that he used to have in different eras of his life. And I just want to read some lyrics from the song The Next Day.
Yeah,
and then
sure.
I promise, I'll get off the Bowie thing.
That's all good.
Here I am, not quite dying, my body left to rot in a hollow tree. It branches through the shadows on the gallows for me, and the next day, and the next, and another day.
Bars.
Like, bars. Straight up. But, like, this is his first album, didn't let anyone know it's coming. He's, like, opening the doors to being like, I'm gonna die soon.
Yeah.
like, I'm not dead yet.
Time is ticking.
Let's talk about it.
I'm in the process. Yeah.
Watch this.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Like, and he brought back some of those like grimy songs from Diamond Dogs and like different styles, and really used the fact that it was a retrospective to his advantage. I think that's really cool. And this now ends the Bowie.
Yeah. Well, I'll ask you a couple questions about it. Yeah. So I seem to remember looking in the list. Did that album come out 2013? Okay. Were you a Bowie fan before that album came out?
Okay. Yeah, actually, I meant to talk about this and I didn't.
Yeah.
Huge Bowie fan.
Okay.
David Bowie and Labyrinth was like one of my first crushes, to be honest.
There you go.
But that album came out and I would have been, what's that, like 16, maybe 15 at the time.
Yeah.
And I was a huge Bowie fan. I listened to a lot of Bowie growing up, and albeit a lot of the greatest hits CDs my mom bought me and stuff.
Yeah.
And then The Next Day came out, and I listened to it, and I said to my teacher, my music teacher at the time, it just sounds like he's dying. Like, I didn't like it.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, this isn't Bowie. What the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
And then I, like, kept listening to it because it bothered me. I'm like, this is like, I haven't heard any new Bowie.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Taylor's
Did I break anything? Oh no, sick.
No, yeah, you're good.
Sorry about that. Just dropping your shit everywhere.
Yeah, it's all good.
And she just kind of like didn't really respond. She was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." And then I kept listening to it because I was like, "What the hell? Like, is this?" And then it clicked. I started listening to the lyrics and realizing what he was talking about and going for. I was like, oh my god, what's happening? Is he gonna leave us? Like, you know, and it kind of brought those emotions and it clicked with me.
Okay, yeah, I was kind of curious because you mentioned that for this album he kind of was going through like all the previous styles that he did. So I was curious as like you as a Bowie fan, if you're listening through that, like, you know, if right away you kind of like got the nostalgia going through, or if it, like the message of the album of kind of him saying like, I'm gone.
I think at that time I was a little young to be honest, Bowie's discography, it's something like 40 albums.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's absurd. He has so many albums, not all of them bangers. So at that time I was probably a little young to catch all the references and wasn't even aware of some of the shitty stuff Bowie did during his life that he's referring to and not making amends for, but coming to terms with on this album, where it's just like, it was lost on me. But as the years kind of went by and I look into it more, and then with Black Star releasing and being a full retrospective on his life, it's like, okay, look back in the catalog, look at all this stuff, see the relevance of it. And I still really enjoy and catch new things on listens of like Black Star and the Next Day and even Reality. Like,
okay, interesting. Because I've heard you talk a lot about Black Star, but I hadn't really heard you talk about Next Day at all. So it's interesting to hear that it kind of like set the stage for Black Star, which, you know, is very, I've heard multiple people kind of really praise for, you know, what it did and what he was able to do for his legacy. And
yeah,
you know.
I mean, there's, you know, in those lyrics I read, it's coming to terms with living up to the legacy. And Black Star is literally about that.
Yeah.
It's actually based on an Elvis song that was never released, that Bowie heard when he went and saw Elvis live.
Yeah.
That was about living up to your legacy, a black star, a dying star.
Gotcha.
And living up to whatever the fuck that means, and how it's impossible.
Yeah, no, it's a very powerful, you know, image for an artist to be conveying.
Thank you for letting me stand on this soapbox.
Yeah, there we go.
I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my turn. So I also have two albums that I kind of want to look at one after the other because they have some similarities, but they also have some differences.
Okay.
So whenever I hear comeback album, my mind immediately goes to AC/DC Back in Black.
Yeah, baby.
Right? And I think I mentioned it to you when we were talking about doing this episode. But and when I thought of the idea, immediately I was like, okay, talking about this. So I was kind of digging into the history of Back in Black, and it's pretty interesting, right? So to kind of sum up how AC/DC's career had been going up to it, right? This band from Australia kind of puts out a bunch of albums, kind of develops this style of like very energetic, straightforward, right in your face rock and roll.
That is a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yep.
And, you know, some people feel differently about it, and, you know, some people love it, some people can't stand it, but, you know, they had their thing, right? And they're developing it, they're gaining momentum, but they never really found mainstream success until 1979, where they put out Highway to Hell.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it got to like number 6 in the U.S. charts. So
it didn't hit number 1?
No, it didn't hit number 1. But this was really their first taste of mainstream success.
Yeah.
And this was recorded with their singer for that run of albums, Bon Scott. And after recording Highway to Hell, Bon Scott passes away from alcohol-induced vomit asphyxiation.
Yep.
Right?
The old Bonham.
Yeah. The unfortunate fate of many of the greatest rock stars.
Maybe I shouldn't make light of that.
The old Bonham.
The old Bonham, you know, as it goes.
Yeah. But after that, what I heard was that, you know, the members of AC/DC didn't know what to do, right? They were considering, you know, giving up, disbanding and moving on. And I guess a bunch of friends and family, including the parents of Bon Scott, convinced them to, or like encouraged them to just continue it with a new singer. So
that's like when you get divorced and your ex's parents like you more than they like their own kid.
Yeah, kind of similar energy. But yeah, they go out and get this Scottish guy by the name of Brian Johnson to sing on their next album.
Who was an ex-pop singer, right?
Yeah, he kind of had this like pop rock band called Geordie, I think.
If you haven't heard it before, go listen to it knowing what he did after. Yeah. It'll blow your fucking mind.
Yeah, it's kind of hilarious just because, you know, Brian Johnson in AC/DC, like, you know, that kind of voice. And in Geordie, he has a nice voice.
I love you.
Yeah, it sounds like a normal dude singing. So it's just so interesting. But they recruit this guy. They get him to sing way higher than his register.
Yep.
And they put out these songs together in an album that they, you know, leave all black as a tribute to Bon Scott. And it's one of the biggest albums ever. Goes number 1. It's huge.
Every song on there is a banger.
Yeah, it's like amazing through and through. Some of the most iconic AC/DC songs are off of Back in Black.
What's it open with? Hell's Bells?
Hell's Bells, yeah. Which amazing opener.
I listen to AC/DC live albums, and that's one of my favorite songs to listen to, because right when that bell starts tolling, the audience just starts flipping shit.
Yeah, you know what's coming, and just the way it builds momentum is so cool. And I think that album really is, you know, AC/DC hitting their stride of like, this is what we are, you know. And at that point, you know, what they had, you know, the style that they had built, I think that's the strongest point it had been.
Yeah.
Like
it also might just be the strongest of their whole legacy. Like up until now, it might be the strongest moment of AC/DC.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a solid argument that can be made for that. Now, looking at the history of the album, there's a couple things I find very interesting. So it was released, I believe, 5 months after the death of Bon Scott, which, if we're talking a comeback, that's kind of, you know, short. Like typically comeback we kind of associate with people kind of going away for a while.
Long periods of time.
Yeah. So in this, you know, there's definitely that shorter, you know, span between, but, you know, they kept working. Now, what I think really makes that album successful is they kind of stuck to their guns for the most part. Like, they didn't reinvent themselves as AC/DC. They got the same producer that worked on Highway to Hell to produce Back in Black, which was Mutt Lange. You know, it's still Angus Malcolm and the singer Brian Johnson writing the songs, where in the past it would have been Angus Malcolm and Bon Scott.
Yeah.
And various iterations of that. So you have similar creative voices coming to the table. And I think they kind of went into it with like, we want to make the same kind of music that people know and love us for.
Yeah.
You know, they had this path, right? And yeah, they knocked it out of the park. Just great riffs, great songs, and they got rewarded for it in so many ways of, you know, that's their height of their commercial success, you know, creative, artistic wise, it's really the height as well.
You ever want to rile up some white people at a party? Put that album on.
Put Back
I don't
in
care
Black on.
who they are, they will get riled.
They'll get going, you know? Like, it's just such a great, one of the definitive rock and roll albums.
Definitely.
Yeah.
One thing that reminded me of, I didn't even think to talk about was, and I won't talk long on this, but even Def Leppard's second album, with their drummer getting in a car accident, or I think it was on a motorcycle, whatever it was, and loses an arm. And a year after that, they released their second album. Yeah. It's like, that could also be seen as a comeback. Dude lost an arm, and they were like, should we get another drummer? He's like, not a chance. No. I'm doing this one-handed. Yeah. And, like, he has his rig and that kind of stuff to do it all. Yeah. And, yeah, I mean, like, 5 months isn't that long.
No, not at all.
Do you know how many of those songs were written with, like, the old singer?
I think they had a couple like lyrics of Bon Scott, but they elected to not use it because they felt that would feel like they're trying to cash in on his death. Like they were trying to.
That thing I told you to do with me earlier.
Yeah, exactly. They have a little bit more integrity.
Disrespectful. Really, me telling you to do it to me is me saying, if you die, I will do that to you.
You know, you're giving consent before the fact. So, you know, that we're good.
We were hanging out the other day, and I got you to give me some chords because I want to work on writing some lyrics. That's so I can write my tears in heaven when you die.
There you go. Unreleased song by Justin. You know, he gave me this chord progression.
He just said some chords out loud. He gets partial writing credit, but I don't have to give him royalties. He's dead.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, there's also some other interesting things with the production of Back in Black. They recorded it in the Bahamas.
Really?
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. I guess they wanted to do it in the UK, but all the studios were booked.
So they were like, where can we go that's hotter than home?
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah.
Angus isn't sweaty enough.
Yeah, we need him to fully just drench his guitar in schoolboy clothes.
But I was thinking about how, like, you know, we say it's weird to go look at the singer's other band. And I was thinking about like interviews and how it's even weird to see interviews of them talking normally.
Yeah.
Just the whole band. And I think my biggest issue with it is I just want Angus to make goblin noises.
Yeah.
That's all I want him to do. I don't want him to speak English. I just want them to ask him a question. He's just like,
yeah. I think, that's what you kind of associate with looking at Angus and expecting out of his voice. Yeah. Rock and roll goblin.
Dude is one of those guys that's so ugly that he does well with women.
Yeah, but it's just such a cool album. And even in the title, Back in Black, they're saying this is our comeback, we're coming for blood.
Yeah, I guess literally put it out on the table.
Yeah. So the other album I kind of want to contrast to this, now you're gonna be very surprised, but it's a Van Halen album.
Shocker.
Whoa, no way. So they kind of have a similar career path, and interestingly enough, Van Halen and AC/DC were two bands that were kind of compared a lot in their day, and they kind of bring a lot of energy to rock and roll, though in different ways.
Yeah, I guess back in the day it would be a lot easier to compare them. I think now with rose tinted glasses on and looking in retrospect, it's very easy to separate the two.
Yeah, to see the difference. But anyway, so in the same way that AC/DC had Highway to Hell come out in 1979, they have a change in singer, and then they put out Back in Black in 1980. So Van Halen had a run of albums and, very successful, kind of redefined a lot of like rock and roll and metal at the time.
Yeah.
And, there was ups and downs. And right at the end, they put out 1984, which at the time was their most commercially successful album.
Is that the one with Panama?
Yeah. So that, it's got Panama, Jump, Hot for Teacher, 1984.
Justin gets mad at me, but Jump is the worst Van Halen song ever.
So I'll challenge you on that, just because the album I want to talk about is 5150.
Okay.
So it's the album that came out right after 1984. So 1984, it's their last album with the original lead singer, David Lee Roth.
Yeah.
And it goes to number 2 in the charts. It would have been number 1 if it wasn't for Thriller.
Oh, okay. Slayed by MJ.
Yeah. Which,
tale as old as time.
There's kind of an interesting thing where, Thriller had a lot of great songs on it, but one of the big ones was Beat It, on which Eddie Van Halen played unpaid and I believe uncredited. So he kind of helped the album that, stopped his from going number 1.
And at least when he played on Black or White, later on on the Bad album, he got credited at least.
They went to rectify that mistake. Anyway, so after they put out this, huge album that goes number 2, they go on this huge world tour that, was the biggest they had ever done at the time. And tensions between band members arise. Their singer, David Lee Roth, leaves the band. So,
Rip.
Yeah, that's kind of a tough thing for a band to, like, at your peak, falls apart. And you kind of have to, find out how you continue. So I guess the big difference between AC/DC and Van Halen is, like, AC/DC, Bon Scott died. So,
yeah. And David Lee Roth was just a drama queen.
Yeah. So they recruit Sammy Hagar to come in. And there are other differences between 1984 and 5150. So they recorded 1984 at Eddie's Studios, 5150, which that's going to get confusing for this. Okay. They also recorded 5150 at 5150, but it was a different producer. So all the albums with David Lee Roth, the producer was Ted Templeman. And by the end, on 1984, the band was trying to, like, really pry away from that. Like, Eddie had a lot of frustration of, he felt, their producer was, hampering him creatively, like stopping him from doing the stuff he wants to do. And one of the big sources of tensions were Ted Templeman and David Lee Roth didn't want Eddie Van Halen to play keyboards, which is kind of an understandable viewpoint considering he's one of the greatest guitar players that have ever lived.
At the end of this, you're going to tell us who the Zodiac Killer is, right?
we'll get into it. But yeah, Eddie had this he got really excited with keyboards at the time, wanted to have more and more of it in Van Halen's music. He kind of got a little bit with, 1984 Jump, I'll Wait, some, synthesizer-driven songs. Yep. Now, for 5150, they got Mick Jones, who was the guitar player in Foreigner, to produce the album, along with Don Landee, which was their engineer for all the original albums.
Okay.
So they co-produced it, but, there's not this voice that's going to, creatively hamper Eddie. So they put out this album, and it goes number one in 1985. So they got their commercials, the commercial success they were wanting, and it peaked, right?
Yep.
From that point, kind of that perspective, they seem at the height of their powers. But there's kind of an interesting difference in how AC/DC fans remember Back in Black and Van Halen fans remember 5150. So, we kind of talked about like everyone loves Back in Black.
Yeah, it's phenomenal album and still is looked back at as their best.
Yeah. Now, 5150 starts the new era of Van Halen, commonly referred to as the Van Hagar album, which I found out there was actually pressure from the label to change their name officially to Van Hagar.
Oh, I'm so glad they didn't.
The Van Halen brothers
that would be
shot
gross.
that down.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there is kind of an interesting thing with 5150 of there's not those songs that are like known by everybody, right? Like
not their big anthem rock hits.
Exactly. Like even the most casual rock fans know Jump, might know Panama and Hot for Teacher, stuff like that. Whereas, most of them won't know a single song off the album 5150.
But guitar players,
well, no, a couple. But so some of the differences I find with that is 5150, I listened to it the other day, and it sort of tricks you into getting on board with this new direction, right? The opening song is, look it up, I think it's called Enough.
Okay.
But that sounds like pretty close to a classic Van Halen song. Mm-hmm. It's got like crazy guitar grooves, this bombastic drums. So it feels very familiar. And then, Good Enough was the name of the song. So then it goes into Why Can't This Be Love?
Okay, yeah.
Which, you might have heard of it, but it's already by the title starting to get a little cheesy.
Yeah.
Then they go back to Get Up. It's got that classic Van Halen double bass groove, high energy. And then it goes into Dreams.
I don't know if I know that song.
So if you think Jump is cheesy,
uh-oh,
let me tell you, Dreams is brutal for that. Summer Nights, also pretty cheesy.
Yeah.
Best of Both Worlds, a little less. Love Walks In, pretty cheesy.
These sound like Lionel Richie songs.
Exactly, right? Like, and that's not, if you think of original Van Halen, most of their songs had this theme of, it was never, oh, I love you, yeah, I love you. Why can't this be love? Love Walks In. David Lee Roth ain't talking about love.
Yeah.
Right? So they had this kind of edge, and they were looking at, darker themes, kind of, like Running with the Devil, sort of life on the road, isolated.
Yeah, they're doing the rock star way.
Yeah, Ain't Talking About Love, title says it all, Love is rotten to the core. A song like Jamie's Crying, talking about like a woman having a bunch of one night stands and not feeling fulfilled by it, kind of thing. And I find that's a big difference with the original Van Halen lineup and then the Van Hagar era of there is way less of that edge to it. It's, a lot more straightforward. They kind of embrace pop sounds of the time, but it's not really what Van Halen fans want out of the music.
Any tin whistles?
No.
On it.
One thing I do find pretty funny is there's a couple points, like, in Van Halen songs where David Lee Roth sort of ad-libs stuff. Like stuff like that, and even during Unchained, it's like, come on, Dave, give me a break. One break, comment, like stuff like that of like goofing around.
Dude was known to just kind of be wild in the studio.
Exactly.
Like, I think they literally just kept playing the song until he started actually singing.
Yeah, just screwing around, and then he starts singing it, and then they cut all the stuff he screws around with. But they try to do that in the opening song good enough. But, you know, for as many things as Sammy Hagar is great at, like phenomenal singer, like had a voice and range that far exceeded what David Lee Roth was capable of.
Yep.
He did not have the same charisma. So there's a part of the song where they kind of go for that breakdown, and he's doing something like, "Hey waitress, what do you have on the menu?" "Yeah, I'll have some of that." Kind of goes. And it's
literally like the least appealing. You listen
Yeah.
to like Hot for Teacher,
Yeah.
and it's like making these innuendos with pencils of David Lee Roth being grimy, and then it's like, "Can I have some pie?"
yeah, pretty much. So there's definitely that like lack of the natural charisma that David Lee Roth has, and I understand it. Of like, you have this band that's a huge part of their sound.
Yeah,
But not everybody is charismatic like David Lee Roth. Very few people are. So I think that's kind of where one thing where they started to struggle. And, you know, overall, just they're losing that edge, I think, was a huge blow to, you know, how those songs will be perceived artistically.
I'm sorry. I just got the image of like thinking about new members coming in and that kind of stuff. Our song "Tear It Apart."
Yeah.
In the middle of it, we have this breakdown, like "I have no love for the millionaire." It's kind of this preachy part where you kind of play the role of like an old school preacher.
Yeah.
I'm imagining Max, our
Trying to do-
very French, like
keyboard
big
player.
bearded dude, trying to do that with his accent.
Yeah.
It wouldn't play.
Yeah, it wouldn't play. So I think there's kind of that similar thing, right? So, you know, contrasting Back in Black with 5150, you know, if you look at it purely commercially, they got what they wanted. It was bigger than the last. It was their, you know, commercial peak, really. But I think Back in Black is remembered so much more fondly by AC/DC fans because they kept going with what they knew they wanted to do, and really, like, it was a continuation of form. Really, the only thing that changed was the guy singing at you, right? It was, you know, same quality of songs, you know, same big riffs, same, you know, straightforward rhythm that you can just rock out to. Whereas with Van Halen, on top of you now have a different singer, you have different production, you have kind of different songwriting in the sense that, okay, Eddie's still throwing this stuff together, but he's not getting the resistance from Dave and the producer. So there's kind of that, you know, he's going off in directions that, okay, for the time would have been, you know, made sense to, you know, have big keyboard songs.
Sometimes getting reined in a bit isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, sometimes limitations can breed creativity.
Yeah.
And then there's also this aspect of David Lee Roth, I believe, wrote all the lyrics previously to Van Halen songs. And
really? I didn't know that. I thought it was Eddie and his brother who were doing that.
So they would have written a lot of the songs, but lyrics was kind of left to the singer in that band.
Okay,
and in the same way, Sammy Hagar wrote the lyrics for Van Halen songs when he was in the band. So you have kind of this, you know, this different voice coming through. And, you know, again, like David Lee Roth was fascinated by kind of more interesting subjects, whereas Sammy Hagar was love walks in. Why can't this be love?
Like Sammy Hagar comes from pretty corny roots, doesn't he? Like
I believe he got his start in a band called Montrose. Okay. And then he had a big solo hit, I Can't Drive 55.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. But it was always kind of like more straightforward. And he never really hit that like tongue-in-cheek charisma that they had built on previously.
David Lee Roth was the friend that you like warn people about, and then the people end up liking him.
Yeah.
Sammy Hagar just kind of is the guy who's like holding the door going, "Milady," you know?
Damn. Whisper in Sammy Hagar. But yeah, so I found that was kind of interesting looking at like two sides of the same coin kind of thing of like they have their similarities and then they have their differences.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like I've never thought to compare AC/DC and Van Halen, but they kind of do fall in line in some things. Not that they play the same way, but that they have their style. They've stuck with it. It's worked.
Yeah.
Like, and obviously, you know, Van Halen breaks out, I would say, a little bit more than AC/DC.
Yeah, in terms of, like, styles they explore, I definitely agree. They kind of, like, go beyond what AC/DC have. Another interesting aspect is at the time they were lumped in together a lot with, like, the shows they were playing and stuff. Like, you know,
were they playing together?
Yeah, Monsters of Rock stuff.
Okay.
And, you know, I seem to remember there kind of was some tension. Like, AC/DC was a huge influence on Eddie Van Halen in developing that style, but I don't think the AC/DC guys were super fond of the kind of things that, you know, Van Halen were doing musically. So it's an interesting, you know, duo of bands that get
Did they
together.
feel out-goblined with David Lee Roth jumping around in
God damn it, baby, you know in line.
They saw his tight pants and they were like, fuck it, we're going kilts.
Yeah. So those are two albums I wanted to bring up. Yeah, any more?
Yeah, I mean, actually, something that kind of falls in line a little bit. I'm going to skip ahead. You know what? I'm realizing that I have so many things here, so I'm going to skip to one that I actually want to talk about.
Yeah.
I'll lightly touch on Kiss, Lick It Up.
Okay.
That was one that I saw on a lot of lists, in that people started to kind of hate Kiss in the late 70s, early 80s. They started out kind of like grimy, bluesy rock, and they very much kind of started to do that cheesy shit.
I was made for love and you
and like, I want to rock and roll all night. I'm going to see Kiss later this month, by the way. I forgot about that.
You're going to their show here?
Yeah, I mean, I was offered a free Kiss ticket. I'm not going to say no to that.
Yeah, why not?
But, like, I can't stand I Want to Rock and Roll All Night. That song's so corny. I want to rock and roll all night and party every day. Like, that's not a rock star song. You know, like, Hot for Teacher is a rock star song. Give me something to ride on.
Man.
Yeah, like, and then there's these corny guys like, let's party all night. Like, it's not.
No, Taylor, you got it wrong. They rock all night.
Oh, sorry.
They party all day.
Oh, my bad, Gene Simmons.
Shout out Gene Simmons.
Lick It Up, you know, they're like, fuck it, we're going to go back to our roots. Their album cover is them without makeup
Okay,
on.
I was going to ask, this is the album
This is the album. They're like, here we are. You could see us now. We're going back. And, like, it's harder hitting. They do more driving guitar licks, like, a lot more, like, quicker stuff. I almost actually like a lot of Van Halen stuff, to be honest. Like,
this album came out in the 80s, right?
83.
83, yeah. Because from what I know about it, I think they had kind of gotten some more guitarists of the era to join them at the time. Because I don't think Ace Frehley played on that record. I think he was kind of long gone by then. Yeah,
and you know, that kind of changeover, but they have, you know, Young and Wasted is great on there. Lick It Up is on that. Give Me More.
Okay.
But it was kind of a return to form. You know, we talk about different comebacks because they didn't stop releasing albums.
Yeah.
But this was just a return to form.
Okay. Yeah.
But I just wanted to quickly touch on that. I have a couple of 2000s. The rest of mine are from like the 2000s.
Okay.
I think the biggest one, you would have been, how old would you have been? You're younger than me. So I would have been 8, you would have been 7.
Yeah.
American Idiot.
Yeah.
You could not escape this album.
No, definitely not. I remember hearing it at the time and I loved it. It was so many great songs on it. You know, of course, with the age that we were at the time, I was dealing with the censored version on the radio.
Yeah,
and I had
Fish of America was one of the lines that they say on the radio.
I distinctly remember hearing like a very bad like bleeped version, but it was like you could kind of still hear him say fuck. So, God bless America kind of thing. But yeah, you're absolutely right of like you could not escape it if you wanted to, but you know, at the time I didn't want to. I wanted to hear as much American Idiot as I could. You know?
When I saw this on the lists, because it made almost every single list, I was like, oh yeah, Dookie was the album before this, and it was almost 10 years ago. No, they released like 3 albums in between it.
Yeah.
yesterday, I made a challenge of listening to all 3 of those albums.
Yeah.
They fucking suck. They're god awful.
Yeah.
Like, they hit success with Dookie. And then I know they were dealing with a lot of addiction issues. And it showed. Like, those albums were bad.
Yeah.
And, like, they just kind of lost, you're coming out of the grunge era where it's all about portraying emotion. I think Dookie does that really well. You're not looking at Trey Cool or Billy Joe Armstrong and being like, wow, his playing's amazing. Like, he's such a great instrumentalist. No, you're thinking, these guys kick ass. They come in, they knock down the door, and everyone's fucking partying.
Yeah, good songs, good energy is what people wanted at that time.
And they didn't have good songs, and then they didn't have good energy for 10 years.
Yeah.
And then they come out with American Idiot.
Yeah.
And they hit the ground fucking running again. We were sitting in my apartment the other day listening to it.
Yeah.
Every single song is a banger.
It's pretty great, yeah.
Also, it's grouped up weird. We didn't notice this when we were kids because we were listening to it on CDs or whatever. But the only song that's not grouped together is American Idiot, and then the rest of the songs are 2 songs lumped together.
Yeah, Holiday and then Boulevard of Broken Dreams,
Jesus Suburbia, and
something else. I thought that When September Ends was on its own too, but I'm not sure.
It might be.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's just weird. I never noticed that until because I don't listen to Green Day very often. But you couldn't be a kid born when we were.
Yeah.
And just never hear this album.
Yeah, not hear or realistically not love that album. Like everyone I know, at least, you play American Idiot, they might not be like, yeah, that's the best album ever, but they'll be like, oh yeah.
And like, we weren't allowed to buy it because it had the explicit symbol on it, but our cousin could, who was older than us, so we'd go to their cottage and then sit in his room and listen to it quiet enough so my mom couldn't hear it. And that album, that instrumental to so many people.
Oh yeah. And I looked up the history of this album a little bit, and there's some interesting stuff there too, where that wasn't the album they wanted to put out in 2004.
Really?
So they got together, started writing and playing songs, and this was described as like a mix of like Latin rock with some folk stuff. Like, it's some like
American Idiot was
the album that was meant to be where American Idiot.
Okay.
So they had these like what was described as like very eclectic songs.
Okay.
And they did demos for them, and then the master tapes are stolen.
Really?
Yeah. So they kind of, they had this whole fight to try to get them back. And at one point, the producer asked them, like, do you guys think this is the best songs you've ever done?
You sure about that?
Yeah. And they said no.
Yeah.
So they gave up on it. They did eventually find them back. I don't know if they ever released them or not, but they got them back. So then they started writing this punk rock opera. And yeah,
thank God those got stolen.
Yeah,
like, to be honest,
that criminal did music history a great service.
Because otherwise, we might be opening up for Green Day. They might just be another Buck Cherry in the world.
But yeah, it's really cool. They had this like, very strong artistic vision as to what the album was going to be, and punk rock opera hadn't really been done before it. You take rock operas and that kind of, musical excessiveness in rock is kind of responsible for starting the punk movement initially. Yeah. So to kind of have the merger of the two is very interesting, and to do it in the way they did, which was really cool. I mean, I think the most important thing is the sound of it, of like, you got these great songs that are just like pretty straightforward punk rock, what you want to hear from a band like Green Day. You don't want to be hearing salsa infused folk rock kind of punk stuff.
You want to hear like, and I wouldn't even classify American Idiot as garage rock, but it was of that time. Dookie, I would say, is garage rock.
Yeah.
But the production on American Idiot is phenomenal.
Yeah, really great.
Really great production that's not taking away from the grime.
Yeah.
I think that's a pitfall that so many bands fall into when they're trying to be, like loose and hard rock and like wall of sound, and that everything's so dialed in and like pristine that it just loses any sense of feeling.
Yeah, no, it's super important. I'm very interested in music that kind of conveys like, the kind of darker sides of humanity in a way, and like we go through life and not everything is like crystal clear and perfect. And
really, I can't tell by all the nihilistic lyrics you write constantly.
Yeah, but it's kind of the interesting thing of like in many aspects, a lot of the world is fucked, and that should be represented by the art that gets made on the world.
I'm just remembering something you said earlier this year, where you were writing a song and was it Fallen? Where you were like, I was going through all my lyrics and I realized all of them were about how shit the world was, so I tried to make one that's like positive.
Yeah, just kind of like put a positive spin kind of on things of like, okay, the world is fucked, but what am I going to do about it?
Yeah. So, okay, not even positive. It's like, keep on swinging.
Yeah, kind of. But yeah, so I think, having that mentality reflected in production is pretty important. And it, especially, as a rock fan, that really conveys the danger and excitement of rock and roll. Like, it wouldn't be necessarily appropriate on like a jazz album or something, but
no, well, I mean, then you're bridging into like apocalyptic black jazz kind of stuff,
Yeah. But no, I think to tie it back to American Idiot, that as a comeback is very interesting because, again, it's a different kind of thing of like this band had, commercial success with their first album. Then they put out a string of just like nowhere. And then they're like, nah, we're coming back.
Not even just a return to form, but an evolution.
Yeah, evolution exceeding the original success, like really going for it.
And then immediately after return to form of those 10 years between Dookie and American Idiot. Because they released an album, this year?
I believe so, yeah. I haven't been paying attention to Green Day releases.
I listened to it.
Yeah.
It's bad.
There you go. Not every album can be American Idiot.
Was there another one you want to talk about?
Yeah, so there's one more, and it kind of ties into this conversation we're having around production. So the album is Deep Purple, Perfect Strangers. So I don't know if you're familiar with this album.
I've listened to it before in the background. So I haven't fully sat down and paid attention.
What this album is a reunion of the Mark II lineup of Deep Purple, which for those who aren't, up to date on like the evolution of the, lineup. So they started out as kind of this like psychedelic blues rock thing. And then John Lord, the keyboardist, and Richie Blackmore, the guitarist, wanted to go in like this more rockin' hard rock direction at the time, that like their contemporaries in Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath were kind of, laying the groundwork for. And they didn't think their singer and bass player would go along well with this. So they got Ian Gillan and Roger Glover to join in. And the first album they put out is In Rock, which is a phenomenal album. Just, a lot of that like early hard rock, heavy metal energy, like big, fast songs, great riffs.
Machine Head was part of this lineup as well, right?
Yes. So they did Child in Time, I believe, Fireball, and then Machine Head.
Which is one of my top 10 albums of all time.
Me too. And it's widely considered the greatest Deep Purple album, one of the greatest rock albums.
Yeah.
And kind of cemented their place in what was considered like the unholy trinity of rock of Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and Black Sabbath.
Yeah.
And after that, they had a couple albums with some lineup changes. So tensions between Richie Blackmore and Ian Gillan kind of rose, and Ian Gillan left the band. And
Richie Blackmore was a psycho, wasn't he?
Yeah.
But just as an aside, he's like tied. They're like Angus Young and Richie Blackmore are like kings of ugly dudes that are so ugly they sling.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, he was not a looker at all, but man, could he ever play.
Oh yeah, he had no desire to shave that unibrow either.
Not at all. But yeah, so they put out an album with the Mark III lineup that had David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes. That those two guys came from a lot more of like a funk soul background, so they kind of brought that sound into the band. Yeah. Richie Blackmore didn't love it. He left. They got a new guitar player, Tommy Bolin, and they disbanded in 1975.
Yep.
They put out a statement saying there will be no more Deep Purple music. And then in 1984, the gang from its height get together, and there's, okay, we're going to start playing again. We're going to put out a new album. Perfect Strangers is that album. And there's a couple things that I find kind of interesting in the album. Like, it opens up with some big Hammond organ, which, that's classic.
That's Deep Purple. Yeah.
That's what you want to hear right away.
He's already standing on top of it while playing.
Yeah. So you hear that sound, and I can imagine immediately there's like this nostalgia for Deep Purple fans. They're like, oh yeah, that's the stuff.
Yeah.
So,
like taking a hit off a fat joint. Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. There you go. But what I think is kind of overarching on the album is when it came out, right? 1984, I believe. So it sounds like an album from the 80s in what I consider kind of some unfortunate ways, right? We've talked about this, I believe, in the past, where drums kind of changed in music in the 80s.
They got bad.
Yeah. Like, it got just very simple of like, you're relying on production to have this big drum sound, and the drummer's just playing this gods.
The 80s is where that basic rock beat got cemented as the basic rock beat. Obviously, there are standouts.
Yeah.
Rush was a band that was like seeing prominence in the 80s, and Neil Peart is not that.
Yeah. So I think what's such a shame is there's a lot of that on this record. And Ian Pace is in my top 5 rock drummers. Like, I think he's phenomenal, and I know he's capable of
He's
much
a killer.
more. Like, you hear the stuff he was doing on, Machine Head, and it's just so much groovier and more exciting, and gives the band like so much more energy and momentum and power compared to just him sitting back on a backbeat.
Oh yeah, and like, I mean, what was it Space Truckin'? I constantly talk about part of his solo in that. It's like a pass off between the hand and the feet, kind of like really quick, that I practice a lot because it's a really simple thing, but with his bombastics behind it, it's fucking amazing.
Yeah, it's really cool. So I think, to have such a great drummer, and, there's very few places on the album where he's playing anything other than like the simplest version of a rock beat possible.
It's a shame.
It's a shame. And, in that there's the 80s sounding drums of, like the little bit of a gated reverb kind of thing, big toms and kicks. And I was kind of thinking about it, about like, why do, like 70s and 60s albums in general sound better to me than a lot of 80s stuff. And I think the 80s kind of marked a shift in the philosophy of it. Felt like before they were trying to get drums to sound like they do in the room for the most part. Just like, okay, we want to hear the power come through. We want to hear, the volume, have the cymbals wash it and stuff. And, you want to hear that snare kind of hit you in the face.
You listen to early Zepp records. That's how I feel about Bonham's kit and how it's mic'd up and how it sounds is I'm standing beside the kit.
Exactly. Whereas it feels like in the 80s, suddenly it was not, how do we make this sound like it does in the room? Let's make it sound like bigger than it does.
Yeah.
That's where they start putting reverb on it, and, you get that huge drum sound, but in that you can't fly around the kit with that because it gets super muddy. Yeah, exactly. So I think there's kind of that. Overall, the album, it has a lot of the elements of that Deep Purple sound. Another kind of unfortunate thing is Ian Gillan, his voice wasn't quite what it was at its peak. And that's, understandable. Like, people age, and also for a dude who sings like he did, that wasn't a style that was going to lend itself to longevity. This was leave it all out and push as much as you can.
Yeah, I mean, that famous show that me and you have watched many times, the live at no, it's not Madison Square Garden.
It's in New York.
It's in New York. And like him and the guitar just going back and forth. Richie Blackmore plays something, and he's like, matching it, that kind of stuff. And both of us, when watching that, it's like, you can't do that and still be able to sing 10 years later.
Yeah.
Like, not a chance. Unless you have the most perfect, like theory and breathing, like you're not going to be able to. And it turns out you can't.
Yeah. So it's kind of a thing of like, he's still Ian Gillan, who, in my opinion, one of the greatest rock singers of all time. So he still sounds good, but you can kind of tell there's a little bit more straining on some of the notes that he's going for, stuff. Overall, the guitar, it still sounds good. It sounds a little bit 80s of, you know, it's scooped in the mids, kind of. You know the sound. I don't want to get too technical with like how they EQ it and all that stuff, but
because we'll be here for hours.
Yeah,
that's
it'll
like
be a long
you
time.
saying, "Okay, Taylor, we're gonna have a podcast on Bowie."
Yeah, but the one thing I think they did right, and you know, considering other decisions they made, I can see maybe they would have debated is like having that Hammond organ is crucial, because I can imagine there would have been a lot of pressure to like. No. That's stuff from the 60s and 70s.
That's old news.
We're all about synthesizers now, which I think would have just been a disaster.
And then here's us writing an album in 2023 of our Lord Jesus Christ, playing on old instruments, getting the Hammond organs out and stuff.
That's being played on a Hammond organ, exactly. But I think there's kind of an interesting thing, too, with, you know, at the time, I think there would have been a lot more pressure for a rock band to sound current and of the time than there would be now. Like these days, I feel like most rock fans don't want a rock record that sounds like popular music in 2023.
For sure.
Yeah. Like, you know, with us recording our album, you know, we're kind of just going in with the goal of like, let's just make this sound cool. You know, like there's attention being paid to like, okay, how do we sound live and how do we want that to transfer over to this record? But we're not listening to what's on the top 40s being like, okay, we got to have the drums sound like that, the vocals have to have this. Like we're, you know, staying away from it. And I think that's, you know, when rock bands that I love these days put out new albums, I'm not saying like, oh, it'd be really cool if it sounded like pop music now. It's like, no, I just want it to sound sick.
And you know what? I will say there are rock bands that sound like 2023 and do a really good job and make it work. Buddy, Quick Playing, Playing God.
Oh, Polyphia. Yeah.
I would say they are 2023 rock.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's the evolution of if you take current day rock.
Yeah.
And they do it well. And like, I don't listen to a shit ton of Polyphia.
Yeah.
Playing God is catchy as hell.
Oh yeah.
And watching him play makes me want to cry.
Yeah.
Because I know I'll never be able to do anything as good as he plays guitar.
Oh yeah, no, they're nuts. But yeah, you know, you're absolutely right if that's a band that leans into the modern sound and does it in a cool way.
But I have noticed actually, especially I think in the guitar community as well.
Yeah.
But in the drumming community, like going on the drumming subreddit and like, you know, YouTube and stuff, there's this huge push of reclamation of the past, of like big snares are coming back. And like people are kind of realizing the drum sound of the 70s, especially is what people dial into, had such a cool place in music that a lot of people are trying to reclaim that with modern recording techniques used in there as well.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really cool way of doing it. It's like, okay, you're kind of making an ode to the past while using modern day shit.
While pushing it forward and kind of, you know, evolution, right? Like no one wants to hear just a pure vintage nostalgia. I mean, some people do, but in general, that's not going to be regarded as like, this is amazing art. It's just like, oh, this is fun. This band sounds like they're from the 50s or whatever. You know?
Yeah. No, I'm not saying to fully like dive into like we like a lot of old bands and that kind of stuff. We're not trying to sound like them.
No.
I mean, look at Greta Van Fleet. That's a way to set yourself up for failure.
Yeah.
But like, you know, using that knowledge of that and moving forward with that knowledge and stealing from many places and not just one is a great way of doing it.
Yeah, for sure. So we went on a little bit of tangent, but I'll just kind of tie it back to the like, you know, the Perfect Strangers album. Like overall.
Oh yeah, that's what we were talking about.
Yeah, we went for a ride. But as a comeback, you know, it brought the gang back together. So it was really a reunion.
Yeah.
And, you know, they had a decent amount of, you know, commercial success with it. I think the album went like number 5 or 6 in the charts or something like that.
Yeah.
So pretty good. But, you know, it didn't last very long. I think they put out a live album after that, and then Ian Gillan left the band again because he couldn't stand Richie Blackmore. And
Valid.
After a while, he came back, and then Richie Blackmore left the band, and he hasn't come back since. So he's off making medieval music with his wife.
Beautiful.
Yeah, but I think there's what they did well in the comeback is they kept elements of their songs, and they kind of realized like, okay, we've been through a lot of like personal stuff as band members, but this was the era we were really at our peak creatively and sonically and all that stuff. So I think bringing that back was cool. What I think was unfortunate is them just, I don't know exactly how it happened, but having so much influences of the times sonically affect the record from a band that like really cut their teeth in the 70s.
They paved the way in a lot of ways, and to just kind of stop paving the way and be like, okay, we're just gonna fall into place.
We're gonna sound like this album is 1984. Yeah. So you got one more album you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about Queens of the Stone Age.
Okay.
In that Songs for the Deaf.
Yeah.
Came out, right? And I think they were actually a band that was really paving the way for coming into that 2000s rock, right?
Yeah.
Songs for the Deaf, you have Dave Grohl on drums, Josh Homme,
I think.
Homie? Okay. And that's a phenomenal album. I don't generally like skits in albums.
Yeah, it's a thing that's difficult to do well, but I kind of agree that like in that one it really fits, and it kind of gets the vibe of like, what they were going for is listening to a bunch of radio stations cut in and out as you're driving through the desert where Josh grew up.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen that little mini doc, what's that called?
The one about desert rock. Yeah, I don't remember what it's called, but on YouTube, I'm sure if you search up, desert rock documentary or something will come
Dave
up.
Grohl in there, Josh Homme and stuff.
Yeah, they're talking about like a lot of the the bands from that era. So very cool.
Pardon me. They released that, and then they kind of do the thing that Deep Purple did a bit, where they kind of just fall in line with the times. They have a few albums in there. Era Vulgaris is okay.
Yeah.
Has Make It With You, Threes and Sevens. I would say Threes and Sevens is more in line with kind of Queens of the Stone Age.
Yeah.
Make It With You is kind of out of place. And the rest of that album and the other one that I can't even remember the name of is just kind of out of place from what you'd expect from a band that made Songs for the Deaf.
Songs for the Deaf, yeah. And something so, as huge and impressive as that album.
And then they put out Like Clockwork.
Yeah.
Which is my favorite Queens of the Stone Age album, which is a bold claim compared to Songs for the Deaf. And I would say the drumming on Songs for the Deaf is a lot better.
Yeah.
I know that's Grohl. Is Like Clockwork Grohl?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I like to chirp Dave Grohl all I want, but dude's a phenomenal drummer.
Oh, yeah.
With no technique. But, they released Like Clockwork, and it's truly a return to form.
Yeah.
Like, you have that classic Queens of the Stone Age sound, and I would say they are a huge influence going into the 2000s for rock bands.
Yeah, I
like
agree.
they kind of set the tone in a lot of ways, and like Jack White was kind of doing his thing around the same time, but I would say even him kind of fell into more deserty rock.
Yeah.
Post Queens of the Stone Age.
Yeah, I don't know how much like influence a band like Queens of the Stone Age had on Jack White. I could see some influences for sure. I would imagine that like if he was aware of like the whole philosophy around that like that desert rock scene of like how they used to like have a generator running the whole stage, so they would put shows next to like
in an abandoned skate park.
Yeah, exactly, an emptied out swimming pool that people were skateboarding in and stuff like that. Like I'm sure that would have appealed to someone like Jack White a lot. And then I think also there's a certain amount of like common influences too of like old blues and blues rock bands that kind of evolved over that.
And like Queens of the Stone Age, when they're hitting.
Oh,
they have that grimy blues-based rock that like does embody a lot of that like grunge feeling of the 90s, right? Well, still kind of making it sound new and exciting. And unfortunately, after that, they've kind of like they have the one Villains, I think is okay.
I like Villains a lot personally. I've listened to that album quite a bit. You know, I most people that I know like Clockwork a lot more.
Yeah.
I haven't dove into like Clockwork super heavy.
You like Villains better?
Of what I've heard, I think I like Villains
better.
No way. Hot take. I
didn't know that about you, and I respect you less now.
Yeah. And then, they put an album this year.
Yeah, we listened to that together a few times in the car, and it was on.
Yeah.
It sounded like Queens of the Stone Age.
Yeah, the songs definitely blend together quite a bit. But
yeah, it's that's a pitfall a lot of bands fall into, I feel, is they just kind of sometimes just drive like in cruise control, and it's like, it's not bad.
Yeah, it's what you expect from this band.
You put on the album, Queens of the Stone Age is happening when you're listening to it, and then it stops and you're like,
okay, no more Queens.
Yeah. That's done.
Yeah. So okay, in terms of the comeback aspect, because I know like Clockwork has a lot of interesting things with how that album was created.
Yeah.
So do you know? Are you prepared to talk about any of them?
Are you prepared to talk about any of them? I read a lot of them last night.
Yeah.
I was looking at it more as a return to form, and now I can't remember a lot of it.
I don't know a whole lot, so this is gonna be one of the parts of the episode where like,
oh, you get to Taylor when you just kind of say facts and hope they're right.
Hope they're right. I do believe Josh Homme was going through a fight with cancer at the time, and very nearly died, and I think that kind of like fed a lot of the musical perspectives he was going from. So there's kind of an interesting parallel there between like the albums we started this episode with, of like the Johnny Cash and David Bowie stuff, of like what they were going through at a time. Now obviously Josh Homme is still alive and survived, so that's good, and there's that difference.
So whereas those albums were confronting death, Josh Homme was actively punching at death, being like, get away from me.
Yeah, be gone. Yeah, but I think that's pretty interesting. And then I don't think they had a drummer when they went into recording it, and then I think he asked Dave Grohl to drum on it, and he couldn't, and then suggested, I forget the guy's name, but the current drummer of Queens of the Stone Age, I believe they got for that album.
Yeah, because what year, I have it written down here,
2013.
2013 is like Clockwork. So yeah, Dave's full swing in Foo Fighters, probably doing world tours and stuff.
Probably pretty busy.
Yeah, he's got maybe not better things to do, but different things to do.
Yeah, well, while we're talking about Queens of the Stone Age and we're mentioning Dave Grohl a lot, I think there is another interesting angle to the comeback thing for these two bands specifically, because both Josh Homme and Dave Grohl, they lead these two bands, Queens of Stone Age and Foo Fighters, but they were previously part of other bands that were very instrumental in their genres, right?
I actually don't know what band Josh Homme was in.
So he played in Caius.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah, he was the guitar player in that, and that was probably the biggest band out of that desert rock scene. Was Caius. So they had their run and then left, and Josh Homme kind of starts this new band. And in the same way, Dave Grohl was a member of Nirvana, for the whoever doesn't know that. But Nirvana, obviously this like massive band, the defining band of the grunge era, really.
Of the 90s, I would say.
They were huge. And, Dave Grohl was obviously a well-respected and, loved member of that band, but
he was the drummer.
People were paying attention to this Kurt Cobain guy who's writing these songs that like sum up everybody's frustrations
and even
at the time.
Pat's probably getting more attention than Dave Grohl, because Dave Grohl's in the back. At least Pat's out front. That's his name, right? Pat?
So they had bassist is Chris Novoselic, and then Pat Smear, I believe Pat Smear was they brought in as a touring guitar player.
Okay.
And then he now plays in Foo Fighters.
Okay, yeah.
But what I think is kind of interesting about these two bands is like they could have been just footnotes in the history of their other respective bands.
Yep.
Had they not have done the like great music that they ended up doing, right? Like it could have been like, oh, you know, you're reading the Nirvana page, it's like, oh yeah, the drummer had this like other band,
solo project,
yeah, Foo Fighters, and nothing really happened.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like, no, it like they got huge, and you know, I think because of that, like it, you know, I think Dave Grohl still would have had his place in rock history, but like he's a rock god now.
The biggest show in Ottawa's history
Yeah.
is the Foo Fighters here in 2017, the day that we met.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, I mean, Foo Fighters all their albums haven't been bangers.
Yeah.
But their relevancy and staying power is
phenomenal.
undeniable.
Yeah, definitely.
They still sometimes put out really good music.
Oh yeah, no, a couple of their albums are like phenomenal.
Yeah.
And I think kind of similar, you know, in a similar vein, Queens of the Stone Age, you know, like that could have just been like, oh, the guitarist of Caius had this band, but like I think more people know Josh Homme from Queens of the Stone Age than Caius. Right?
Yeah, and like I mean, yeah, I think more people know Nirvana. Yeah. But like still to even come close
is like
to that relevancy is
phenomenal. And you know, like Dave Grohl, you know, has come very close to like matching the relevance of Nirvana, and then Josh Homme is like far exceeded what, you know, Caius was, and to be fair, exceeding the cultural relevancy of Caius is a lot easier than the cultural relevancy of Nirvana.
Yeah, that's like trying to get number one above Thriller.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
it's just not gonna happen, dude.
Yeah. So you know, there's kind of this thing of like for both these guys, their new band was this comeback of like, you know, I have more music to give. I mean more to this than just what my last band was, kind of thing. So.
Yeah, and I mean Dave Grohl specifically had a bunch of music stockpiled. Yeah. Because he kept bringing it to Kurt, and Kurt was like, I'm not doing that. And Dave Grohl's like, fine, I'm just going to write it down, put it in the corner. Yeah. Kurt passes away. He's like, well, I got 3 albums.
Yeah, go through it. But yeah, I think you know, what they were able to accomplish is pretty cool. And, you know, and they hit that comeback and just kept building on it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting thing looking at these comebacks and seeing like what happened after, because I mean we start out talking about like people's comeback was at the end of their life as they were dying, and then you had comebacks that, you know, gave the band a ton of momentum and then kind of like kept riding that momentum. In AC/DC you had bands at the comeback kind of
return to form.
Yeah, return to form. You had some that, you know, okay, it was a little reunion and it fizzles out again, kind of like Deep Purple. But I mean, in that same vein, Deep Purple is still going today and putting out albums, though, you know, it's not the same members of that reunion or the original lineup or anything.
And now with Foo Fighters, you have, you know, we talked about comebacks confronting death. Literally, Foo Fighters is a comeback birthed out of death. Yeah. Like a phoenix. Like
exactly. So I think that aspect of it is really cool. And I think that's, you know, part of why Foo Fighters are, you know, have their state in rock music that they have. On top of, you know, putting out great music for as long as they have, and, you know, kind of still making music. So
yeah, rest in peace, Taylor Hawkins.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that kind of covers, you know, a lot of the stuff of like what makes a comeback and what good things there are, what bad things there are.
Yeah, man. I mean, this was a pretty appropriate topic for us coming back, and only time will tell if this is a real comeback or not.
Yeah, our first one-off reunion.
I'm really happy we're doing this again, man. Yeah. And I'm thinking next time we'll be talking more about some stuff that's actually going on with us and the band, and
yeah, that'd be fun.
Maybe some stuff like that, but that's all I'll say.
Yeah,
because we haven't actually talked about that, and I don't want to overpromise, underdeliver.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening. If you have any episode ideas you want to hear us talk about, be sure to email us at louderthanthefridge@gmail.com.
Yes,
I think, and we'll start monitoring that email again. All right. Peace.
Thanks for listening. Peace.